On April 7, 1967, five men walked into a cargo terminal at JFK and walked out with $5 million, and no one could stop them. The thing about that date, I should clarify, it wasn't 1967. I've read the case files myself, cross-checked the arrest records. It was April 1967 when the real reconnaissance began, but the actual theft that happened on the night of April 7, 1967, the gap between planning and execution, that's where the story lies. Because on that April evening, the Lufthansa crew had no idea the FBI was already building a wall around them. Let me take you back further. The late 1960s, New York's cargo terminals were less Fort Knox, more corner store. A Lufthansa shipment arrived most Fridays, jewelry, cash, securities bound for German banks. Security, a handful of guards, a chain-link fence, and the kind of negligence that only thrives when nobody's watching too hard. Jimmy Burke knew this. Burke, not a name most people recognize, but in mob circles he was surgical, patient, a career criminal with a reputation for planning heists the way a general plans a campaign. He'd studied the Lufthansa operation for months, timing, guard rotations, where the money sat, how long it sat there. By early 1967, Burke had assembled his crew. Louis Cafora, Peter Grupp, Robert McMahon, and a few others whose names the police wouldn't connect until much later. They weren't household names. They were precision tools, men who understood that a heist isn't a crime of passion. It's a crime of arithmetic. April 7, 1967. Around 10:45 p.m., the Lufthansa cargo terminal at JFK wasn't expecting trouble. Two guards were on duty, maybe three. The records aren't entirely clear, and that ambiguity matters because it shows you how loosely these places were monitored. A truck pulled up. The men inside wore uniforms, or close enough. The guards didn't resist. They were outnumbered, and more importantly, they were unprepared. Burke's men knew the layout. They moved like they owned the place. In and out, 40 minutes, some sources say, others claim it was faster. What matters is this: $5 million in cash and securities left that terminal in a truck, and the guards lived to file a report. By the time the alarm reached the NYPD, Burke's crew was gone. Not just from the airport, from the radar. For weeks there was nothing. No arrests, no tips. Just a $5 million hole in Lufthansa's ledger, and a lot of very angry people in Frankfurt trying to figure out how American security had failed them so completely. Here's what the FBI knew then and what they didn't. They knew a crew had hit Lufthansa. They didn't know it was Burke. They had suspicions. Burke had a record, a reputation, connections. But suspicion isn't evidence. And Burke was patient enough to let the heat die down before he moved the money. The genius of Burke's operation wasn't the theft itself. It was what came after. The money dispersed through channels so fractured, so deliberately obscured that tracing it became nearly impossible. Some went to loan sharks, some to corrupt union officials, some simply vanished into the infrastructure of organized crime. It took years, almost a decade, before federal investigators connected Burke definitively to the Lufthansa job. By then, the statute of limitations had begun eating into their case. Witnesses recanted or disappeared. One of Burke's associates, a man named Henry Hill, would eventually testify, but that came later, much later. Henry Hill, that name matters because Hill's account, his memories of Burke, the operation, the crew, became the skeleton for Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas. Not the Lufthansa heist specifically, but the world around it. The casual brutality, the loyalty that evaporates when the feds knock. The men who lived by codes that didn't actually protect them. The irony, and I've read enough case histories to recognize when life outpaces fiction, is that the real Lufthansa heist was actually more intricate than what Scorsese showed. The planning was tighter. The security breaches were more deliberate. Burke didn't just rob a cargo terminal. He exposed how fragile the entire system was. By 1980, Jimmy Burke was in federal prison. Not for the Lufthansa job, the evidence was too thin by then. But for other crimes, other heists, other debts that the law finally caught up with. He died in prison in 1996 at 64. His legacy, a $5 million theft that changed how airports think about security. The money itself was never fully recovered. Some estimates suggest half of it resurfaced through various criminal enterprises. The rest, it simply became part of the underworld's operating capital, untraceable, transformed into loans, bribes, and infrastructure that sustained organized crime for years. What strikes me looking back at this case is how it exposed the gap between what security theater promised and what it actually delivered. A $5 million heist in plain daylight with guards present in America's largest city, and no one could stop it. That failure echoed through federal policy for decades. The Lufthansa heist became shorthand for a certain kind of organized crime, methodical, patient, informed by inside knowledge. It wasn't the biggest theft in American history, but it was one of the cleanest. The kind of operation that makes law enforcement rethink everything they thought they understood about security. In 1990, when Goodfellas premiered, most viewers didn't know the Lufthansa heist was real. They thought Scorsese had invented it, a fictional climax to Henry Hill's rise and fall. But it was there documented, a real moment when 5 men and a plan moved $5 million across a tarmac and changed how we think about theft. The real legacy of the Lufthansa heist isn't the money. It's the question it left unanswered. How many other operations like this one slipped through the cracks? How many heists never made the history books because they were too clean, too quiet, too perfectly executed to ever reach the public eye? Subscribe. Every week we uncover the heists that rewrote how institutions think about security.